That Christmas Eve, something inside me finally broke. It wasn't the twinkling lights or the decorated table that did it. It was the quiet knowledge settling heavy in my chest. That love in my family had long ago been reduced to transactions. For nearly a decade, I had answered every carefully worded plea, every just this once emergency believing I was protecting us. In reality, I was only feeding an illusion, one that hollowed me out a little more each year. Betrayal rarely arrives with thunder. It seeps in like water through cracked foundations unnoticed until the structure collapses. Mine came wrapped in thank yous, softened with words like family and sacrifice. And by the time I dared add up the cost, $42,000 had slipped away along with pieces of my trust, my freedom, and the faith that blood was enough to bind us. So when the breaking point came, it wasn't sudden. It was the inevitable conclusion to years of silence and self-denial. And when my father finally looked me in the eye and spoke the words that cut me loose, I discovered that freedom can sound an awful lot like exile. What happened at that dinner table would ignite everything that followed. But before I could grasp the full weight of it, I had to live through the moment itself. At Christmas Eve dinner in Lakewood, Colorado, the world I thought I understood cracked wide open. My father, Frank Mitchell, fixed his bloodshot eyes on me across the candlelit table, his jaw tight. Voice slurred slightly from the beer he'd been nursing since noon. "You're not my daughter anymore," he spat, each word dropping like a hammer. The room went silent, forks paused mid-air. Brittany's phone light still glowing as she tried to catch a candid family moment for her Instagram story. The prime rib sat steaming on the platter untouched, as if even the food sensed it had stumbled into the wrong theater. I remember the way my chest tightened, like the air itself had frozen, but my mouth curved upward before my brain caught up. I stood deliberately chair legs, scraping against the hardwood. My voice was steady, almost too calm. "Good," I said, smiling coldly. "Because you're not my father either." Gasps erupted around the table. Carol's hand flew to her chest. Brittany's ring light clattered to the floor, but I didn't flinch. That exchange is so simple, so final was the spark that would ignite everything. What none of them knew was that 8 years of secret sacrifices and $42,000 of my hard-earned money had led us here. This isn't just a story about a broken family Christmas. It's about the moment I stopped being their silent provider, the day I decided to burn the bridges they had been crossing for years without a second thought. But to understand why I smiled while severing blood ties, I need to take you back to the beginning, back to 2016, when I still believed family loyalty was sacred and unshakable. I'm Sarah Mitchell, 32 years old, a marketing manager at Peak Digital Solutions in downtown Denver. I make $75,000 a year, not rich, but comfortable by the city's brutal cost of living standards. I rent a modest one-bedroom in Capitol Hill with creaky floors and windows that rattle when the wind howls down Colfax Avenue. My pride and joy is a used 2018 Honda Civic. I keep spotless because reliable things, cars, routines, budgets make me feel safe. For years, I thought I had everything under control. A stable job, enough savings to cover emergencies, a simple but independent life. But what I didn't realize was that my financial stability had slowly been bleeding out, siphoned into a black hole that wore the shape of my family. My parents still live 20 minutes west in Lakewood, in the same split-level ranch where I grew up. The place is a relic of middle-class optimism, faded blue siding, sagging gutters, and a maple tree in the front yard that Dad planted the year they moved in. I used to think that tree was unshakable roots, deep branches, steady. I didn't know then that even giants rot from the inside. My dad, Frank, is 58 now, but the man I remember from childhood was larger than life. He spent 25 years at the Ford assembly plant, union badge worn proudly on his chest, his hands thick with calluses that seemed to carry the weight of the family. My mom, Carol, is 55, the kind of woman who could stretch a dollar until it screamed. She worked part-time as a bookkeeper, efficient and exact, though her paycheck was barely enough to keep up with Lakewood's rising costs. Then there's Brittany, my younger sister, now 26, who reinvented herself as an influencer. 50,000 Instagram followers and a curated feed of Starbucks lattes, outfit of the day shots, and weekend trips to Vail, all staged, all funded by someone else. If the house is the museum of our family's history, the garage is Dad's shrine. His man cave is immaculate. Craftsman tools lined in perfect order. Ford memorabilia plastered across the walls, and in the center, his unfinished 1987 Mustang. hood perpetually open, engine half-assembled, as if frozen mid-breath. For 24 years, he's been promising to finish it. For 24 years, it's been nothing more than a dream on cinder blocks. Sometimes I wonder if that car was just a metaphor for us always waiting, never becoming. Everything unraveled in November 2016. I still remember Mom's voice on the phone, trembling but deliberate. "Your dad's been laid off." I drove home that weekend, heart-pounding, to find Frank in the garage, hunched on his workbench. In his lap lay a pink slip, the kind of paper that looks harmless until you realize it has erased your future. His shoulders, once square and commanding, seemed smaller. 25 years, Sarah," he whispered, staring at that slip as though it had betrayed him personally. They gave me a cardboard box, and 25 years just disappeared. It was the first time I saw my father look defeated. The man who taught me to change oil and distrust shady mechanics, reduced to silence and beer cans. The garage smelled of motor oil and cold Coors Light, the new perfume of his failure. Mom tried to compensate with her bookkeeper wages, but the numbers didn't add up. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter like a jury ready to convict. Their whispers at night carried through the thin walls. Mortgage insurance, overdue notices, words I'd never heard associated with them before. The first request came that December. I was sprawled on my couch in Denver, watching Sunday Night Football, when Mom called. Her tone was careful, almost gentle. "Honey, we need some temporary help with the mortgage. Just this once. $1,400. I hesitated, 3 seconds maybe. Then guilt pressed its heavy hand on my shoulder. They were my parents. They'd sacrificed for me, supported me through school. How could I say no? "Of course, Mom. I'll transfer it tonight." It felt noble, even satisfying. One daughter stepping up when her family stumbled. But I didn't know then that if I'd just stepped onto a treadmill, I wouldn't be able to get off. The emergencies multiplied. February. Dad's car needed transmission repairs, $800. April medical bills for his back, $1,200. June property tax reassessment, $600. Each time, Mom's voice carried the same refrain. "Just this once. Emergency. We'll pay you back." I wanted to believe her. The alternative? That the life I'd built was slowly dissolving into their financial sinkhole was too bleak to face. So I swallowed my doubts and wrote the checks. Meanwhile, Brittany lived in the basement rent-free, spinning fantasies of entrepreneurial glory. I'd walk in to find her filming TikTok dances under a ring light, Starbucks cup in hand, while Dad clapped like she was the second coming of Steve Jobs. Our little entrepreneur, he'd beam. When I mentioned landing a marketing campaign that boosted conversions 40%, Mom would glance up from her paperwork and murmur, "That's nice, dear." But Brittany's half-baked ventures. They gathered around like she was building the next empire. The double standard carved into me slowly like water cutting stone. I was reliable, yes, but reliability became invisible. My worth to them wasn't in who I was, but in how quickly I could open my wallet. Years blurred together in receipts and Venmo transfers. Christmas gifts, $400. Brittany's textbooks for her latest course, $300. Emergency dental for Dad, $900. I stopped calling it generosity and started calling it survival. My survival. Their survival all tangled into one suffocating knot. It wasn't until recently, when I forced myself to add it up, that the truth hit me. One night in my apartment, I pulled my bank statements and created a spreadsheet. Line after line, transfer after transfer. The total glared back $42,000. $42,000. Enough for a down payment on a starter home in Denver's insane market. Enough to max out retirement contributions for years. Enough to buy me freedom, stability, maybe even joy. Instead, it had vanished into my family's dysfunction. Into beer cans in the garage, Brittany's curated lifestyle. Mom's endless reassurances that things would turn around. I stared at the number, my stomach twisting, realizing the truth I had avoided for years. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their personal ATM. And the worst part, I was starting to suspect they didn't even need the money anymore. But that Christmas Eve in 2024, I would finally find out the truth, and when I cut them off at midnight, the consequences would be nuclear. If you really want to understand how twisted my family dynamics had become, you need to know about Brittany's so-called empire. While I was quietly funding the household, my little sister was building her personal brand as a lifestyle influencer, living rent-free in our parents' basement and posting content that painted a picture of her Instagram feed was a masterclass in manufactured reality. Morning coffee posts from the Starbucks on Wadsworth, outfit of the day photos featuring clothes that somehow kept appearing in her closet, and wanderlust shots from weekend trips to Vail that she definitely couldn't afford on her inconsistent income. The captions were always the same. Living my best life, grateful for every blessing, independent woman energy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here, I was actually independent, actually paying my own bills, plus everyone else's. And Brittany was the one getting praised for her entrepreneurial spirit. Her business ventures read like a catalog of modern scams. In 2019, she dove headfirst into Beauty Counter, that multi-level marketing company that promised women they could build empires selling skincare. $3,000 of family money later, our bathroom cabinet was stuffed with overpriced moisturizers that nobody used. The business lasted exactly 4 months. Then came the cryptocurrency phase in 2021. Brittany convinced Dad she'd figured out the secret to trading Bitcoin and needed $5,000 to get started. She'd found some online course that promised to teach ordinary people how to make millions. Frank, who barely understood email, was suddenly talking about blockchain technology and digital wallets. That money vanished faster than snow in July. The handmade jewelry venture of 2022 was almost quaint by comparison. Brittany set up an Etsy shop, bought $2,500 worth of supplies, and managed to sell exactly 4 pairs of earrings before getting bored and moving on to her next big idea. Last year, it was lifestyle coaching. She spent $1,800 on certification courses to become a wellness coach. Despite having never successfully managed her own life, she gained exactly 0 clients, but somehow convinced herself she was building a personal brand. Each failure was met with the same family response. "Oh, honey, you're so creative. Not everyone is brave enough to take risks. You'll figure it out." Meanwhile, my steady job and consistent income were dismissed with comments like, "At least someone in this family plays it safe." In October, I drove out to Lakewood for Sunday dinner and walked into what looked like a production studio. Brittany had set up professional ring lights in the living room and was filming a TikTok dance while Dad sat in his recliner, watching her with pure pride. The setup had cost $400, according to the Amazon boxes still sitting by the door. "Look at our little entrepreneur," he said, as Brittany did some complicated hand gesture for the camera. Always thinking outside the box, Mom came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel. So creative, so ambitious. Not everyone can be like Brittany. I'd just finished telling them about a marketing campaign I'd led that increased client conversions by 40%, generating over $200,000 in new revenue for my company. Their response had been, "That's nice." Dear before immediately shifting focus back to Brittany's content creation. Carol's comment hit me like a slap. Brittany has such entrepreneurial spirit. Not everyone can play it safe like you do, Sarah. Some people are born to take risks. The way she said safe made it sound like a character flaw, like stability was something to be ashamed of. That's when my friend Madison showed me something that made my stomach drop. Madison Torres teaches high school at Jefferson and has been my closest friend since college. She's dealing with her own family situation, watching her mother's early-stage dementia while trying to maintain healthy boundaries. Unlike me, Madison had figured out that normal families don't make one kid responsible for everyone else's problems. We were at Great Divide Brewing that Tuesday night, sharing a picture of their Colorado IPA when Madison pulled out her phone. "You need to see this," she said, scrolling to Instagram. She'd been following Brittany's public account and had access to her close friends' stories. The post showed Brittany carrying grocery bags up the front steps of my parents' house. The caption read, "Grateful to support my aging parents during tough times." The hashtags were even worse. "Family first, blessed to give back. Taking care of the ones who raised me." The image had been carefully staged. Brittany looked like a devoted daughter shouldering the burden of caring for her parents. There were heart emojis and praying hands. Dozens of comments praising her for being such a good daughter. Not a single mention of me. Not one word about the 7 years of mortgage payments, car payments, utility bills, and emergency expenses that I'd covered. According to Brittany's version of reality, she was the family's financial savior. Sarah Madison said gently, "Normal families don't make one kid responsible for everyone else's problems. I'm watching my mom forget my name, but I still don't let her control my bank account." Madison had been setting boundaries with her own family for months. She visited her mother twice a week, helped coordinate medical care, but she didn't fund her lifestyle. She'd found respite care services and support groups. She'd learned the difference between helping and enabling. I stared at Brittany's post, feeling something shift inside my chest. This wasn't just about money anymore. My sister was actively taking credit for sacrifices I was making while publicly portraying herself as the devoted daughter. She was building her brand on my back. The worst part was realizing she absolutely knew about our financial arrangement. She lived in the house. She saw the bills coming and going. She watched me write checks and transfer money. She knew exactly who was funding the family's lifestyle, and she'd chosen to lie about it. When I left my parents' house that night, I noticed Brittany's car in the driveway. A 2022 Honda CR-V with custom license plates that read Influence. The monthly payment was $315. Guess who'd been covering that too? I sat in my own modest Civic, looking at that vanity plate, and felt the bitter irony wash over me. I was subsidizing my sister's fake lifestyle, while she got praised for the independence I was actually paying for. Something had to change, and I was starting to realize it would have to be me who changed it. To understand why my father Frank became so hostile toward my help, you have to understand what that garage meant to him. It wasn't just a place to park cars or store lawn equipment. It was his kingdom, the last place on earth where he still felt like a man who mattered. The garage was organized with military precision that would have impressed his old Ford supervisors. Craftsman tools hung in perfect rows, arranged by size and function like a mechanic's museum. Ford memorabilia covered every available wall space. Souvenirs from 25 years on the assembly line when American manufacturing still meant something. There was a mini fridge perpetually stocked with Coors Light, a workbench that could have belonged in a professional shop, and his pride and joy, that 1987 Ford Mustang project car he'd been working on since I was 8 years old. Frank had grown up in an era when a man's worth was measured by his ability to provide through physical labor. He'd started at Ford right out of Jefferson High School, back when factory work meant steady paychecks, union benefits, health insurance, and respect in the community. He built his entire identity around what he called real work, honest labor that produced tangible results, versus my computer job that he never quite understood or trusted. The tools in his garage weren't just equipment. They were extensions of his hands, proof of his competence, symbols of his ability to fix anything that broke. Frank could rebuild an engine, repair electrical problems, and construct furniture that lasted decades. These skills had defined his masculinity for 40 years. The November afternoon in 2016 when Ford laid him off, Frank came home carrying everything that mattered from his work life in a single cardboard box: his supervisor badge, a coffee mug with the Ford logo, some safety awards, and a handful of personal photos. I found him sitting on his workbench 3 hours later, still holding that pink slip, staring at it like it might change if he looked long enough. "I built this family with these hands," he said without looking up, his voice hollow in a way I'd never heard before. "Now I can't even keep the lights on. What kind of man does that make me?" I tried to comfort him with words that felt inadequate even as I spoke them. "Dad, layoffs happen everywhere. The whole industry is changing. It's not your fault." "Easy for you to say," he replied, and there was an edge to his voice that made me step backward. "You got that fancy college degree? That office job where you push papers around? You don't understand what it means to work with your hands, to build something real, to know that your labor actually matters." I wanted to argue, to explain that my marketing work required skills and created value. But what was the point? Frank had spent a quarter-century supervising production teams, managing complex schedules, and solving mechanical problems that kept assembly lines running. His experience and knowledge were genuinely valuable. But at 51 years old, in an economy that had moved on without him, none of that seemed to matter to potential employers. That's when the drinking started. Not alcoholism exactly, but what Frank euphemistically called his thinking sessions. He'd crack open a Coors Light at 10 in the morning and sit in his garage, supposedly strategizing his job search. The empty cans multiplied faster than his job applications, which barely existed. Initially, Frank was grateful for my financial help. The first few months, he'd thank me with genuine emotion in his voice, sometimes getting teary-eyed during phone calls. "You're saving us, Sarah. I won't forget this. We raised you right, and now you're taking care of us when we need it most." But as the months turned into years, gratitude curdled into something darker and more corrosive. Each check I sent became a reminder of his failure as a provider. Every time I covered a bill, it proved he couldn't fulfill his most basic responsibility as a husband and father, the man who taught me to change oil and check tire pressure, who'd fixed every broken appliance in our house with determination and ingenuity was now dependent on his daughter's computer job paycheck. The resentment started small and grew like comments about my easy life sitting in air conditioning all day while he'd spent decades in the heat and noise of the assembly line. Jokes about how nice it must be to make money pushing paper around instead of doing honest physical labor. He'd praise Brittany's creativity and entrepreneurial spirit while dismissing my steady career as playing it safe, taking the easy path. By 2019, the hostility was impossible to ignore or rationalize away. Frank would lecture anyone who'd listen about work ethic and entitled millennials, looking directly at me while talking about kids today who don't understand what real labor means. He'd go on about participation trophies and handouts as if my marketing degree had been handed to me instead of earned through 4 years of college and a decade of professional experience climbing the corporate ladder. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving 2023. Frank was 3 beers deep when he started his usual rant about young people who expect everything to be handed to them on a silver platter. Everything's about money these days instead of values. People don't know what it means to earn something through sweat and dedication. He was staring right at me while talking about Brittany like she was building the next Amazon empire from our basement. Look at your sister. She's got vision, drive, imagination. She's not afraid to take risks, to fail, to get back up and try again. That's what real success looks like. Mom enabled every word with her practiced supportive smile. Your father's just frustrated about the job market, honey. Don't take it personally. Men his age have a harder time adjusting to economic changes. But it was personal, deeply, painfully personal. Here I was, quietly funding their lifestyle while being lectured about work ethic by a man who'd spent 3 years drinking beer in his garage instead of seriously pursuing employment opportunities. That's when I started noticing the mail Frank would intercept before anyone else could see it. Envelopes from the Colorado Department of Human Services, the Department of Labor and Employment. Official-looking correspondence that he'd grab from the mailbox and disappear with into his garage sanctuary. Whenever I asked about them, he'd wave me off dismissively. Just job training program information, government bureaucracy. Nothing important. Madison helped me understand what was really happening during one of our evening conversations at her apartment. Her father was going through something similar with her mother's dementia care, refusing outside help because real men handle family problems themselves. Stubborn masculine pride was destroying both our families in different ways. The thing about Frank's resentment was that it wasn't just about losing his job or needing financial help. It was about role reversal that threatened his fundamental sense of identity. His daughter had become the provider while he'd become the dependent. For a man who'd built his self-worth around being the family's financial foundation, accepting help from me was like admitting he'd failed at the most basic level of fatherhood. But he needed the money. God, did he need it. The mortgage, the car payments, the utilities, the insurance premiums. Without my contributions, their comfortable middle-class lifestyle would have collapsed immediately. So, Frank found himself trapped in a psychological prison of his own making. He hated needing my help, but he'd gotten addicted to the lifestyle my contributions made possible. The garage workshop, the project car, the ability to turn down jobs that fell beneath his former status, because Sarah's checks would cover the bills anyway. What I didn't realize yet was that Frank had found a way out of his trap. He'd discovered a source of income that let him feel like a provider again, while still taking my money without guilt. A financial solution that restored his sense of masculine competence and justified his continued dependence on my support. He just hadn't bothered to tell any of us about it. The evidence was hiding in plain sight. In those government letters he kept intercepting, in the subtle improvements to his garage workshop, in the confidence that had slowly been returning to his voice during our phone conversations. I just hadn't put the pieces together yet, but I would soon enough, and when I did, everything would change. If Frank was the hammer in my family's manipulation toolkit, then my mother Carol was the scalpel. Where Dad used brute force and guilt trips, Mom wielded surgical precision that came from years of working with numbers and understanding exactly which psychological buttons to push. Carol's job as a bookkeeper at Lakewood Family Medical gave her more than just basic accounting skills. She understood cash flow payment cycles and, most importantly, the psychology of financial requests. She knew exactly when to ask, how to frame the need, and which emotional levers would get the fastest response. Her signature move was the casual concern call. She'd start with genuine interest in my life, asking about work projects or weekend plans, building a warm connection before transitioning seamlessly into crisis mode. The technique was so smooth, I didn't recognize it as manipulation for years. A typical call would go like this. Hi, honey. How's work going? That client presentation went well. I'm so proud of how hard you work. Oh, by the way, we received the property tax reassessment today. 800 more than we expected this year. The county's really squeezing homeowners. I hate to burden you with this, but we're trying to figure out how to handle it. Notice the structure. First, validation and connection. Then the problem presented as external circumstances beyond anyone's control. Finally, the request disguised as sharing a burden rather than asking for money. She never directly asked me to pay. Instead, she created a scenario where offering to help felt like my own generous idea. Carol had perfected 3 psychological tactics that made her requests almost impossible to refuse. She created artificial urgency by claiming deadlines that may or may not have existed. She positioned problems as impossible situations that left them no options. And crucially, she always provided a guilt-free escape route by saying things like, "Don't worry if you can't help right now." That last part was genius. By giving me permission to say no, she made saying yes feel like a choice rather than an obligation. It eliminated my psychological resistance and made me feel generous instead of used. The Christmas 2022 medical bills incident was a masterclass in Carol's technique. She showed up at my apartment with a manila folder full of paperwork from Frank's back surgery. Insurance covered most of it, but we're stuck with $3,200 in out-of-pocket costs. Copays, deductibles, you know how health insurance is these days. I immediately offered to help, feeling grateful that Dad was okay and proud that I could ease their financial stress. It wasn't until months later, when Madison helped me calculate Frank's disability benefits, that I realized they should have been able to handle those costs easily. Carol's financial secrecy was another red flag I missed for years. She worked 20 hours a week at $18 an hour, bringing in about $1,500 a month. But whenever I offered to help with budgeting or financial planning, she'd get defensive. "Honey, I've been managing money since before you were born. I think I can handle our household expenses." The irony was that she clearly couldn't handle the expenses, or she wouldn't have needed my help. But Carol treated any questioning of her financial management as a personal attack, effectively shutting down conversations that might have revealed how unnecessary my contributions really were. What I didn't understand at the time was that Carol's resentment ran deeper than financial stress. She'd wanted to be a full accountant when she was younger and had dreams of running her own practice. Instead, she'd married Frank right out of high school, had kids, and settled for part-time bookkeeping jobs that paid the bills but never fulfilled her ambitions. Watching me succeed in my career was like seeing her unlived life playing out in front of her. Every promotion I earned, every professional achievement I shared, reminded her of opportunities she'd given up. She was proud of me on some level, but that pride was tangled up with envy and regret. That's why she lived vicariously through Brittany's entrepreneurial adventures while treating my steady success like it was somehow less valuable. Brittany represented the risk-taking, ambitious woman Carol wished she'd been. I represented the practical path she'd actually chosen, and she resented that reminder. The breaking point came in late October when I finally attempted a direct conversation about the family's finances. I'd been tracking our patterns for months, noticing that the emergencies always seemed to coincide with Brittany's latest business ventures or Dad's garage purchases. "Mom," I said during a Sunday dinner, "maybe we should sit down and look at your monthly budget together. I could help you find ways to reduce expenses or increase income." Carol's reaction was immediate and intense. "Are you questioning how I manage our household? After everything we've done for you, everything we've sacrificed, you're going to lecture me about money management?" The mask slipped completely. This wasn't about emergency expenses or unexpected bills. This was about control, about maintaining a system where I funded their choices while being excluded from decision-making. Carol wanted my money, but not my input, my support, but not my oversight. That night, Madison lent me a book about emotional manipulation in families. Reading it was like having someone describe my life back to me. The artificial urgency, the guilt-free escape routes, The defensive responses to reason Carol had been playing from a playbook I'd never seen. Madison was dealing with her own version of family financial pressure. Her mother's dementia care was expensive, but Madison had found support groups, researched Medicare benefits, and set clear boundaries about what she would and wouldn't fund. She visited twice a week coordinated medical care, but didn't write blank checks for lifestyle expenses. I started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. Frank's new iPhone 14 Pro that cost over $1,000, Carol's weekly manicure appointments at $45 each, Brittany's constant Amazon deliveries of items she supposedly couldn't afford. The lifestyle they were living didn't match the financial crisis they kept describing. Either they were secretly wealthy and manipulating me for sport, or they had income sources they weren't telling me about. I needed evidence before confronting them directly, so I started documenting everything. Screenshots of text message requests, receipts for money transfers, notes about timing and stated reasons for each emergency. Building a case felt wrong, like I was investigating my own family. But I'd learned that feelings weren't facts, and the facts were starting to tell a very different story than the one my parents had been sharing. The truth was hiding somewhere in those government letters Frank kept intercepting, and I was determined to find it. The investigation phase of my family's finances started the same way I'd approach any marketing research project at work. I created spreadsheets, tracked patterns, and analyzed data points that I'd been ignoring for years. The difference was that this time, the numbers were breaking my heart while simultaneously setting me free. November 2024 marked the beginning of my detective work. During family visits, I started paying attention to details that didn't match their constant claims. A financial struggle. Frank's brand new iPhone 14 Pro, which retailed for over $1,000. Carol's perfectly manicured nails, maintained weekly at $45 per appointment. Brittany's constant stream of Amazon packages containing everything from ring lights to designer workout clothes. The lifestyle they were maintaining didn't align with people who needed emergency financial assistance every month. Either they were secret millionaires playing some twisted psychological game, or they had income sources they weren't telling me about. My marketing instincts told me to follow the money trail. The breakthrough came during a routine bathroom visit at their house in mid-November. Carol had left an opened envelope on her kitchen desk, and the return address caught my eye. Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. I shouldn't have looked, but after 7 years of funding their emergencies while sacrificing my own financial goals, I felt entitled to understand their actual situation. The letter was a disability benefits statement. Frank's name at the top, monthly payment amount of $1,247, effective date of January 2022. I stared at those numbers until they burned into my retinas. $1,247 times 35 months. Over $43,000 that Frank had been receiving while telling me they were broke and desperate. I sat in my car outside their house afterward, hands shaking as I tried to process what I'd discovered. This wasn't just about taking my money unnecessarily. This was active deception on a massive scale. Frank had been double-dipping, collecting substantial disability benefits while accepting my financial support lying directly to my face about their need for help. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. Not only had they been manipulating me financially, they'd been treating me like an idiot who couldn't figure out basic math. The careful timing of their emergency requests suddenly made sense. They'd wait until Frank's disability payment was spent on non-essentials, then call me for the actual bills. Madison helped me calculate the real cost of my generosity when I called her that night. $42,000 over 7 years could have been a down payment on a house in Denver's competitive market. The median home price was around $450,000, meaning I'd essentially funded 10% of a house for people who already had stable income. "They're not just taking your money, Sarah," Madison said as we sat in her kitchen the next evening, surrounded by her graded papers. "They're stealing your future." That money could have been compound interest in retirement accounts, could have been career development courses, emergency funds, travel experiences. Madison was dealing with her own family boundary issues, watching her mother's dementia progress while maintaining healthy limits on financial support. She'd researched Medicare benefits, found support groups, and learned to separate emotional manipulation from genuine need. Her perspective helped me see my situation with painful clarity. That's when I met David Chen at a Colorado Technology Association networking event downtown. The event was held at the Denver Art Museum, and I'd gone reluctantly. more focused on my family drama than professional networking. David was standing by the registration table, looking as awkward as I felt at these forced mingling events. We started talking about the usual networking topics, work industry trends, Denver's tech scene. But what struck me immediately was how differently he talked about family obligations compared to my experience. His Vietnamese parents had immigrated in the 1980s with nothing, built a small restaurant business through decades of sacrifice and discrimination. Despite their actual financial struggles and cultural expectations about family duty, they'd never asked David or his siblings for money. They wanted us to build our own lives, he explained over coffee after the networking event concluded. Real parental love means wanting your children to thrive independently. They'd rather sleep on floor mattresses to save money for the business than take financial support from us. The contrast was startling and shameful. David's parents, who'd faced genuine hardship, language barriers, and racial discrimination, prioritized their children's financial independence. My parents, who had multiple income sources and stable housing, treated guilt trips like a legitimate financial strategy. My investigation deepened as I started connecting dots I'd previously ignored. Brittany's Instagram posts about her new MacBook Pro for content creation posted the same week Carol called about an unexpected car repair. Frank's garage improvements, new tool purchases, and project car parts that kept appearing despite his supposed unemployment. I began researching Colorado laws about adult children's obligations to parents and discovered something liberating. There was zero legal requirement for me to financially support able-bodied adults, even if they were my parents. The guilt I'd been carrying about potentially abandoning my family was based on emotional manipulation, not legal or moral obligation. The evidence was overwhelming by early December. Screenshot conversations about emergencies, bank records showing regular transfers. The disability statement proves Frank's hidden income, a lifestyle funded by deception and manipulation. But the most damaging evidence came from Brittany's social media activity. Her private Instagram stories showed expensive purchases and activities, while her public posts painted her as the family's financial savior. She was building her influencer brand on lies about supporting aging parents. While I actually funded their lifestyle, I started documenting everything systematically. Screenshots of family group text emergencies, receipts for money transfers, notes about timing, and stated reasons for each financial request. Building a case felt wrong, like I was investigating my own family, but I needed proof before any confrontation. On a December evening, I drove up to Lookout Mountain with Madison to process everything I'd discovered. The city lights spread out below us like a constellation, and the winter air was so clear you could see individual buildings downtown. I've been enabling a system that benefits everyone except me, I said, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. Frank gets to maintain his pride and his lifestyle. Carol gets to avoid full-time work and budget responsibility. Brittany gets to play entrepreneur with someone else's money while taking credit for family support. Meanwhile, I was living paycheck to paycheck despite a decent salary, skipping vacations, postponing major purchases, and sacrificing my own financial future for people who'd been lying about needing help. Madison handed me her thermos of hot chocolate and asked the question that changed everything. What do you want to happen here, Sarah? Do you want them to admit they don't need your money and apologize? Do you want them to pay you back, or do you just want it to stop? I considered her questions seriously. The truth was, I didn't want apologies or repayment. I wanted my life back. I wanted to stop being the family ATM and start being treated like a daughter. I wanted to fund my own dreams instead of other people's comfortable irresponsibility. The decision crystallized that night on the mountain. No more money until we had an honest conversation about the family's actual financial situation. It was time to test whether they wanted Sarah the daughter or Sarah the bank account. I just wasn't prepared for how nuclear that test would become. Christmas was 3 weeks away, and I had a feeling it would be a holiday none of us would ever forget. The drive home through Lakewood's quiet neighborhoods felt different that night. Instead of the familiar comfort of childhood streets, I saw evidence of the deception everywhere. Houses like my parents' modest but well-maintained, occupied by people who could afford their lifestyle without manipulating their children. I was done being their financial safety net. The question was whether our relationship could survive without the money that had apparently been holding it together. Thanksgiving 2024 was supposed to be my trial run. a chance to test whether I could maintain boundaries under family pressure. What I got instead was a masterclass in manipulation. That made Christmas Eve feel inevitable. The guest list was larger than usual. Along with the core family, we had Aunt Patricia, my mom's sister who'd retired from nursing at Presbyterian St. Joseph. Uncle Jim, her husband, had spent 40 years as an electrician with Excel Energy before retiring. Their daughter Maya, 29 and working as a paralegal at a downtown Denver firm, brought her usual sharp observations about family dynamics. The wild card was Uncle Tom, Dad's younger brother who sold insurance for State Farm. Tom had brought his 16-year-old daughter Rebecca, a Jefferson High student with the kind of brutal honesty that only teenagers possess. I arrived with a $75 bottle of wine, a guest contribution rather than my usual funding of the entire event. The difference was immediately obvious. Mom looked stressed as she bustled around a kitchen filled with dollar store decorations instead of the elaborate Thanksgiving setup I usually bankrolled. The turkey was smaller than previous years, the side dishes were fewer, and there was a tension in the air that had nothing to do with football scores. Carol had funded this dinner herself, and the strain showed in every corner she'd cut. Brittany was treating the gathering like content for her followers, setting up ring lights in the dining room and live streaming the meal. Preparation. Her commentary was insufferable. So grateful for family traditions. Nothing beats homemade everything. Look at this gorgeous spread my mom created. She kept interrupting conversations to get the perfect shot, directing family members to pose with dishes they hadn't made and smile at, moments that felt anything but natural. The whole meal became a performance for an audience of strangers on the internet. Dad attempted normalcy by focusing on the Broncos game playing in the background, but his commentary was pointed. Some people don't appreciate family traditions anymore. Everything's about money these days instead of just being together. Tom engaged with the football talk naturally while the rest of us navigated increasingly obvious tension. Frank kept making comments designed to bait me into feeling guilty about my absence from meal funding. The real test came after dinner, when the dishes were cleared and everyone was settling in for pie. Frank and Carol exchanged a look I'd learned to recognize. Then Carol launched into their prepared pitch. We've been talking about Christmas, and we want to do something really special this year. Invite everyone for Christmas Eve dinner. Make it a celebration the whole family will remember. We're thinking about $800 for groceries decorations. Maybe some special touches to make it memorable. The room went quiet. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. The first time I'd be asked to fund a family event since discovering Frank's hidden disability income. Let me think about it, I said simply. The reaction was immediate and telling. Frank's face turned red like I'd slapped him. Think about it. It's my family, Sarah. You don't think about helping your family. Carol jumped in with her practiced wounded tone. We raised you better than this kind of selective generosity. Brittany, not looking up from her phone where she was editing her live stream footage, added her commentary. God, Sarah, you're being so selfish. It's literally Christmas. That's when Uncle Tom surprised everyone. Hold on here, he said, setting down his coffee cup. When did Sarah become responsible for funding everyone's holidays, Frank? Immediately turned his anger toward his brother. Stay out of family business, Tom. You don't understand the situation. Tom didn't back down. I understand that my daughter works hard for her money, and nobody in this family expects her to pay for our celebrations. Maybe that's something worth understanding. The brothers stared at each other across 20 years of accumulated resentments, and I realized this dynamic was bigger than just my money. Frank had always been the older brother who took charge, made decisions, and expected others to follow his lead. Having Tom question his authority in front of the whole family was humiliating. Patricia and Jim exchanged uncomfortable glances. Maya was taking notes on her phone out of habit from her paralegal work. Rebecca was watching everything with the fascinated horror of someone witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Later, Rebecca approached me privately while the adults argued football statistics and avoided the obvious tension. Your family's dynamics are super weird, she said with 16-year-old bluntness, like really toxic. My dad never guilt trips me about money. That whole thing was uncomfortable to watch. Her honesty was refreshing after hours of adult manipulation and passive-aggressive commentary. She was right. Normal families don't operate like this. Madison had come as my emotional backup, and she witnessed the whole performance. Afterward, as we drove home together, she didn't mince words. Sarah, this isn't normal family dysfunction. This is systematic financial abuse. You need an exit strategy because they're not going to change their behavior. They're going to escalate. That night, I discovered Brittany had sent me a Venmo request for $200, labeled Christmas family dinner contribution. She'd also posted on her private Instagram story about some family members being stingy during the holidays, complete with passive-aggressive Christmas trees and money emojis. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was my sister, who'd never contributed a dime to family expenses, publicly shaming me for not immediately agreeing to fund another family event. Driving home through Lakewood's quiet streets, past houses decorated with modest Christmas lights, I felt something crystallize in my chest. Thanksgiving had been a test, and while I'd passed by maintaining my boundaries, my family had failed spectacularly by revealing their true priorities. Christmas would be the final battleground. I'd attend dinner because I still loved these people despite their behavior, but I wouldn't fund their celebration. If they wanted my presence, they'd have to accept it without my wallet attached. The question was whether they'd choose family connection over financial control. Based on their Thanksgiving performance, I wasn't optimistic about the answer. Christmas Eve 2024 arrived with the kind of Colorado snow that makes everything look peaceful from the outside. I drove to my parents' house at 6 p.m. carrying a $75 bottle of wine, the same guest contribution approach I'd used at Thanksgiving. The financial strain of funding their own celebration was visible before I even walked through the door. The house was decorated with dollar store garland and LED lights that flickered inconsistently. Gone were the elaborate wreaths and expensive ornaments I'd unknowingly subsidized in previous years. Carol had clearly stretched their actual budget to its limits, trying to create a memorable Christmas Eve dinner without my usual funding. The dining room held the same extended family crowd from Thanksgiving. Patricia and Jim sat quietly observing. Maya took her usual mental notes, and Rebecca watched everything with teenage fascination. Uncle Tom's presence still created tension with Frank, their Thanksgiving argument about family financial responsibility hanging unresolved in the air. Mrs. Henderson from next door had joined us as she often did for holidays. At 70, she'd become something of an honorary family member, which meant she'd witness whatever was about to unfold. Carol bustled around the kitchen with visible stress, having funded the prime rib roast and elaborate sides herself. The meal represented a significant expense for someone claiming financial hardship, but appearances mattered more than logic in my family's world. Brittany had transformed the living room into her personal content studio again. Ring lights illuminated the Christmas tree while she live-streamed family preparations for her followers. Her commentary grated on my nerves. Nothing beats Christmas Eve with the people who matter most. So grateful for family traditions that never change. Frank attempted normalcy by discussing the Broncos' disappointing season, but his drinking pace suggested he was preparing for confrontation. Empty beer bottles accumulated on his side table faster than usual. Dinner conversations started safely with work updates and holiday plans, but I could feel the undercurrent of expectation. Everyone knew about Thanksgiving's financial request and my non-committal response. The extended family was watching to see how this would play out. Halfway through the main course, Brittany made her announcement. She set down her fork dramatically and smiled at the table like she was revealing a lottery win. I have incredible news to share with everyone. I've created a comprehensive business plan for my lifestyle coaching program. It's going to revolutionize how people approach wellness and personal development. Frank immediately leaned forward with pride. Now that's our entrepreneur. Tell everyone about your vision, sweetheart. Brittany launched into a presentation she'd clearly rehearsed. The program would combine fitness coaching, nutritional guidance, and mindset transformation. She'd researched certification requirements, designed marketing strategies, and calculated potential revenue streams. The problem was funding. She needed $8,000 for professional website development, marketing campaigns, and certification courses. In Brittany's mind, this wasn't just a business investment. It was the family supporting her dreams. Carol smoothly transitioned into her pitch. We're so proud of Brittany's innovation and ambition. Sarah, since you understand business marketing, maybe you could help with this startup investment. The phrasing was careful. Not asking for money directly, but suggesting my expertise was needed, implying that supporting Brittany was really about validating my own professional knowledge. I took a sip of wine and responded calmly. That's quite a substantial investment. Have you researched small business loans, SBA programs, or angel investor networks? Frank's reaction was immediate. Loans. Her family, Sarah. Family helps family launch dreams. You make good money at that tech company. Stop being so tight-fisted with success. I felt something shift inside me, like a gear clicking into place after years of grinding. I've been helping for 7 years, Dad. Maybe it's time for a different approach to family financial independence. Frank's voice rose enough that Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Helped you think. Writing a few checks makes you some kind of martyr. You wouldn't have anything without us raising you right, giving you opportunities. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Frank was rewriting history, claiming credit for my education and career success while dismissing 7,000 years of financial support as insignificant. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone. I'd probably own a house by now if I hadn't been supporting adults who can support themselves. I showed the table the screenshot I'd saved. Frank's disability benefits statement. $1,247 monthly effective, January 2022. Like this disability payment you've been receiving for 2 years while telling me you're broke. The silence was absolute. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Tom whispered, Jesus Christ, under his breath. Maya stopped taking notes. Rebecca's eyes went wide with understanding. Frank's face turned purple with rage and humiliation. How dare you investigate your own family like some kind of detective? That's private information, but the damage was done. Everyone at the table now understood that Frank had been collecting significant monthly income while accepting my financial support. The manipulation was exposed, and Frank knew it. He stood up so fast his chair rocked backward. You think paying bills makes you family? It doesn't. Real family is about loyalty, not transactions. You're not my daughter anymore. Get out of my house. I stood up slowly, feeling calmer than I had in years. You know what, Dad, you're absolutely right. I'm not your daughter. And you're not my father. Consider us even. Frank stared at me like I'd grown a second head. What did you just say to me? You heard me perfectly. You just disowned me, so I'm disowning you right back. Seems like a fair trade. The table sat frozen in shock. Brittany had stopped recording. Carol looked like she might faint. The extended family watched a nuclear explosion happening over Christmas dinner. I grabbed my coat and turned to address everyone else. I apologize for disrupting Christmas Eve, but I won't apologize for standing up for myself after 7 years of this. Frank continued screaming as I walked toward the door. Don't you dare walk away from me. I'm your father. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. No, Dad. You just said I'm not your daughter. You can't have it both ways. I walked out into the snowy Colorado night, leaving behind 24 years of Christmas traditions and a family that had just shown their true priorities. Sitting in my car with the engine running, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. Christmas Eve night found me driving aimlessly through Denver's empty streets, my hands still shaking from adrenaline and disbelief. The snow was falling steadily, coating the city in a blanket of white that made everything look peaceful and clean. I ended up at Red Rocks Amphitheater, the parking lot completely deserted except for my Honda Civic and the vast Colorado landscape stretching out below. This had been my thinking place since college, where the mountains and open sky helped put problems into perspective. Tonight, I needed all the perspective I could get. I sat in my car with the engine running, trying to process what had just happened. My father had disowned me at Christmas dinner, and I'd disowned him right back. After 32 years of family loyalty, I'd finally reached my breaking point. I called Madison first, barely able to form coherent sentences through the tears and adrenaline. She arrived 30 minutes later with a thermos of coffee and emergency blankets from her trunk, sliding into my passenger seat like she'd done this before. You did the right thing, she said, simply handing me the steaming coffee. That took incredible courage that most people never find. I oscillated between relief and panic. Did I just destroy my family? The question felt pathetic even as I asked it, but I needed to hear her answer. They destroyed themselves years ago, Madison replied without hesitation. You just stopped enabling the destruction. That word hit me like a physical blow. Enabling. I'd never thought of my financial support that way. But sitting in the amphitheater parking lot overlooking the twinkling city lights, I realized she was absolutely right. I hadn't been helping my family. I'd been funding their dysfunction and calling it love. The decision crystallized as we sat there talking in the cold car. I pulled out my laptop and connected to my phone's hotspot, the screen illuminating our faces in the darkness. With methodical precision, I began dismantling 7 years of financial entanglement. Wells Fargo mortgage autopay, $1,400 monthly. I navigated to the online banking portal and canceled the automatic payment. Toyota Camry payment, $315. Canceled. Honda CR-V payment for Brittany's car, $265. Canceled. Exile Energy utilities that I'd somehow ended up paying $150. Canceled. Comcast internet service, $80 monthly. Canceled. Each click felt like cutting an umbilical cord that had been strangling me for years. My hands were steady now, my mind clear with purpose. This wasn't revenge, this was self-preservation. Madison watched quietly as I worked through the list, occasionally offering encouragement or asking if I was sure about specific decisions. Yes, I was sure. 7 years of being treated like an ATM instead of a daughter had made me very sure. David arrived as I was finishing the financial cuts. I'd called him despite the late hour, needing someone who understood healthy family boundaries. He brought hot chocolate from a 24-hour gas station and a camping blanket from his emergency kit, sitting with me in comfortable silence as I processed what I'd done. Love doesn't mean letting people financially destroy you, he said eventually. Real parents want their children to thrive independently, not fund their lifestyle. His Vietnamese parents had immigrated with nothing in the 1980s, built a small restaurant through decades of sacrifice and discrimination. Despite their actual struggles, they'd never asked their children for money. They wanted us to build our own lives, David had told me. Real parental love means prioritizing your children's future over your own. Comfort. The contrast with my family's behavior was stark and shameful. David's parents had faced genuine hardship and chose sacrifice over manipulation. My parents had multiple income sources but treated guilt trips like a legitimate financial strategy. I spent the next hour on the phone with automated customer service systems, removing myself from shared accounts and changing passwords. Netflix subscription where I was somehow the primary account holder. Spotify Premium that the whole family used. Amazon Prime that funded Brittany's constant shopping. The family phone plan that had my name as the responsible party despite everyone else using the service. Each action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten existed. By the time I finished, it was nearly 2 a.m. And Frank and Carol would be waking up Christmas morning to a cascade of notifications. Declined payments, service interruption. Warnings, account access denied messages. 7 years of financial support ending in one decisive night. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. sharp. Frank's number appeared on the screen, and I almost answered out of decades of conditioning before remembering that he disowned me just 8 hours earlier. I let it go to voicemail. The messages escalated exactly as I'd expected. First came anger. Fix this financial nonsense immediately. This is not how family treats family. Then threats. This is elder abuse. Sarah and I'm calling the police. You'll regret humiliating me like this. Then bargaining. We can discuss this reasonably, sweetheart. I know we can work this out. Finally, desperation. Please, honey, we can work everything out. I love you. Carol tried a different psychological approach through text messages. Long paragraphs about hurt feelings, family forgiveness, and how I was being influenced by outside people who didn't understand our family bonds. She targeted Madison specifically, suggesting my best friend was poisoning my mind against my loving parents who had sacrificed everything for me. The manipulation was so transparent now that I'd learned to recognize the patterns. Carol was following a textbook playbook, cycling through guilt victimization and attempts to isolate me from my support system. The techniques that had worked for 7 years suddenly seemed pathetic and obvious. Brittany's social media meltdown was almost entertaining to watch. Instagram stories about toxic family members and people who abandon you during the hardest times. She was fishing for follower sympathy without explaining the context, playing the victim card with professional expertise developed through years of influencer performance. But the extended family's response surprised me completely. Maya texted within hours of Christmas morning. About damn time someone stood up to Uncle Frank's bullying. I've been watching this dynamic for years and wondering when you'd finally had enough. Patricia called that afternoon to say she should have spoken up years ago and was proud of my courage. Even Uncle Tom sent a supportive message expressing admiration for my decision to set healthy boundaries. The most unexpected validation came from Rebecca, Uncle Tom's 16-year-old daughter. She'd apparently been recording parts of the Christmas Eve dinner and posted a TikTok about family drama without naming names. The video showed her shocked reaction to the argument, and her captions simply read, "When family dynamics get toxic." That video reached 50,000 views overnight, with hundreds of comments from young adults sharing similar stories about financial manipulation and boundary setting with toxic relatives. Rebecca had accidentally created a viral moment about generational conflict, and the response overwhelmingly supported the girl who finally stood up for herself. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, and I woke up in my own apartment feeling something I hadn't experienced in 7 years. My bank account showed no automatic deductions scheduled for the month ahead. My phone showed 23 missed calls from my parents, but I felt no obligation to answer them. Madison came over with coffee and breakfast pastries, and we sat by my living room window watching Denver wake up on Christmas morning. The city looked different, somehow brighter, and more full of possibility. "You realize you're not alone in this, right?" she said, scrolling through Rebecca's TikTok comments on her phone. "Look at all these people cheering for you. You've given others permission to set their own boundaries." She was right. While my birth family was imploding over their lost financial control, I discovered a support system I hadn't known existed. Madison, David's sympathetic extended family members, and even strangers on the internet who understood my decision and validated my choice. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't dreading the bills that would arrive next month. I wasn't calculating how much emergency money I needed to keep available for family crises. I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck despite a decent salary, watching my own future disappear into other people's financial irresponsibility. I was free, and Frank's increasingly desperate voicemails couldn't change that reality. The daughter who'd quietly funded their lifestyle for years was gone, replaced by a woman who finally understood the difference between helping family and being exploited by them. The revolution had begun, and there was no going back. January 2025 brought consequences that rippled through my family like an earthquake, forcing everyone to confront reality without my financial cushion. 3 weeks after Christmas Eve, the full impact of my decision was becoming clear, and it wasn't pretty. Frank's employment wake-up call came first. For the first time since his Ford layoff 8 years earlier, he was forced to seriously search for work. The reality check was brutal for a 58-year-old man with an 8-year employment gap. His options were limited and humbling. I heard through Maya that he'd applied at Home Depot, Lowe's, and King Soopers before finally accepting a position in Home Depot's lumber department at $16 an hour. The psychological adjustment was crushing. Frank went from being a shift supervisor managing teams to taking orders from managers young enough to be his children. Maya told me he'd broken down crying in the employee break room during his second week. The proud man who'd built Ford engines for 25 years was now asking customers if they needed help loading 2x4s. His coworkers quickly learned to avoid his constant complaints about ungrateful children and family betrayal. Carol faced her own budget crisis without my monthly contributions. The math was simple and unforgiving. Frank's disability payments plus his part-time Home Depot salary totaled about $3,800 a month. Their fixed expenses alone consumed nearly $3,500. For the first time in 7 years, Carol was forced to create an actual household budget. She canceled the premium cable package, reduced grocery spending from $200 to $120 weekly, and eliminated her nail salon visits. Every dollar had to be tracked and justified. The adjustment was painful for someone who'd grown accustomed to financial flexibility funded by my contributions. Carol took a full-time bookkeeping position at 40 hours per week, finally using her skills to their potential. The additional income helped, but it also meant acknowledging that she could have been self-sufficient years earlier. Brittany's lifestyle imploded spectacularly. Without family funding, her content creation became unsustainable overnight. She couldn't afford professional photography, trendy clothing hauls, or restaurant visits for Instagram content. Her followers noticed the decreased production value immediately, and engagement rates plummeted. The girl who'd spent years calling herself an entrepreneur was forced to apply for retail work. Target hired her as a seasonal employee for $15 an hour. The reality of 8-hour shifts demanding customers and a supervisor younger than herself was a humbling education about actual value creation. But the real crisis came in February when the foreclosure notice arrived. Wells Fargo's 90-day warning landed like a bomb in their mailbox. Without my mortgage payments, Frank's combined income couldn't cover the $1,400 monthly payment plus property taxes, insurance, and basic utilities. That's when Frank broke completely. He called Maya from the Home Depot break room, sobbing into the phone and begging her to contact me. The proud man who disowned me on Christmas Eve was now facing the loss of his house and his dignity simultaneously. "I was wrong, sweetheart," he'd cried through Maya's phone. "I need help. We're losing the house." Maya delivered my response exactly as I'd requested. "Then sell it and downsize like normal people do when they can't afford their lifestyle." The legal threats Frank had made in January backfired spectacularly. He'd contacted some lawyer friend about elder abuse claims, hoping to force me back into financial compliance. The attorney's response was blunt and humiliating. "Adult children have zero legal obligation to support parents. You're embarrassing yourself with frivolous threats." Carol's accounting skills finally became useful when she was forced to analyze their actual financial situation. Her spreadsheet revealed they'd been living $800 above their means for years, subsidized entirely by my contributions. The recommendation was obvious but devastating. Sell the house and move to an apartment they could actually afford. The community consequences were almost as damaging as the financial ones. Mrs. Henderson and other Lakewood neighbors had witnessed the Christmas Eve explosion and heard the subsequent arguments echoing through the thin walls. Frank's reputation in the neighborhood was permanently damaged. His pride in homeownership, in being a provider, in commanding respect as a Ford supervisor, all of it crumbled under the weight of financial reality. The man cave garage that had been his sanctuary for decades would disappear, along with his project car and tool collection. Rebecca's influence continued growing throughout the crisis. Her original TikTok video about family drama had spawned a series about financial boundaries and toxic family dynamics. She'd become an inadvertent advocate for young adults dealing with manipulative relatives, and her follower count had reached 500,000. The comments section had evolved into a support group for people with similar experiences. Stories of financial abuse, guilt manipulation, and successful boundary setting filled every post. Rebecca was providing a voice for a generation that refused to accept their parents' dysfunction as normal. One of her videos featured her reaction to learning about Frank's disability, payments, her teenage honesty cutting through family pretense. "So, my uncle was getting over $1,200 a month while guilt-tripping my cousin for grocery money? That's not family, that's fraud." The extended family realignment was perhaps the most telling consequence. Patricia, Jim, Moya, and Tom had formed closer bonds with me while distancing themselves from Frank and Carol's toxic behavior. Family gatherings were reorganized without Frank's central presence, and the atmosphere was notably more peaceful. Tom had been particularly vocal about supporting my decision. At a family dinner I wasn't invited to, he'd apparently told Frank exactly what he thought about the financial manipulation. The brothers' relationship was permanently damaged, but Tom had chosen principles over blood. Brittany's work experience at Target was providing an education she'd never received at home, dealing with difficult customers, learning workplace hierarchy, and earning respect through competence rather than family status was teaching her lessons no entrepreneurship course could provide. By March, she'd started community college business administration courses, paying her own tuition with Target wages. For the first time in her life, she was learning to connect effort with results. Her social media content evolved from fake lifestyle posts to authentic stories about working retail while pursuing education. The house sale became inevitable by spring. Frank and Carol listed the Lakewood Ranch for $420,000, hoping to clear enough after the mortgage payoff to afford a modest apartment deposit. They'd have to move to a complex near Sheridan, losing the neighborhood where they'd lived for 30 years. As I watched these consequences unfold from the safety of my own stable life, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness at seeing people I loved struggle, but also relief that their struggles were finally their own responsibility. Guilt over causing pain, but also satisfaction that justice was being served. The most unexpected development was my own transformation. Without the constant stress of family financial emergencies, my work performance had improved dramatically. I'd received recognition for projects I'd completed without the mental distraction of family drama. A promotion to senior marketing manager seemed likely for the spring. My relationship with David had deepened without family chaos constantly interrupting our time together. We'd started discussing moving in together, building a life based on mutual respect rather than financial manipulation. For the first time in 7 years, I was living within my actual means instead of subsidizing other adults. Lifestyle choices. I'd opened investment accounts, booked a vacation to Iceland, and started seriously planning for my own future. The domino effect was still playing out, but one thing was certain. My family would never be the same, and for the first time in years, that felt like progress rather than destruction.